It's been about 8 years and just over 11,000 hours since I started playing Final Fantasy XIV, and in that time I managed to do everything PvE related that could be done, bar a few deep dungeon solos and mount farms. Although I've had my share of raid groups and party finder excursions, I've noticed over the last few years somewhat of a reluctance and uncertainty in a lot of players that want to try and get into content more challenging than an alliance raid or the occasional extreme trial. As a player that's done hardcore progression and even what some might say are a pretty good overall finish for Savage, I thought I'd throw my hat in the ring to give some advice for starting out on the two most run endgame contents out there: Savage raids and Ultimate raids. I recommend watching this if you finished normal mode raids and maybe dipped a toe into extremes and enjoyed them. This might seem like a weird place to start for advice, but unfortunately the best way to begin getting into endgame is making sure that you have a grasp over certain things for your job and role in a group. Be it openers and rotations, group mitigation buttons, or general game knowledge like respecting transcendence, it's vital to have some game sense. While being able to obtain gear from tomestones can make damage checks easier, it's still good to know how to play your job well enough that there's some leeway for inevitable deaths that happen during a progression raid. This is especially important on jobs that feature raid buffs or enemy debuffs that increase damage during a burst phase, where everyone uses their strongest cooldowns to dish out huge damage on the boss. For example, I play physical range, so for Bard and Dancer, their buffs come back every 2 minutes, like most jobs as of this video. They need to sync up with the rest to stack all at once. For Savage, I'd advise practicing the latest extreme or even just alliance raid content while trying to practice your job's rotation. Get familiar with which buttons are situational and which should be pressed when shiny. Resource wise, for getting more knowledge, simply looking at the skills in game can be a good help most of the time, as some will give you buffs or enable other abilities as listed in their descriptions. For rotations, the resource I generally use are ones found on the Balance website or Discord, links in the description, giving a timeline for your opener and advice or general rotations on a job. As jobs tend to be quite static for Final Fantasy XIV, you might find that once you learn your recommended opener that you'll be able to play it well for a long while, as no major changes tend to come mid-expansion. On release can be different depending on the job. Once you brush up a bit and feel more confident with the job you're playing, I recommend checking what gear you'll need for best in slot, usually being the highest item level gear with the ideal secondary stats. These are easy to find, again the Balance resources usually have them quickly after a patch. But if you want a quick idea of what to look for, usually critical hit is the best secondary stat, followed by direct hit or determination. Avoid skill and spell speed on most jobs, and for tanks and healers, tenacity and piety are not great but not the worst either. This part is easier said than done, but one of the best ways to start raiding is finding or putting together a group to begin doing Savage on a casual schedule. This way you have the same consistent teammates, can build synergy, which I'll touch on more later, and don't have to search through Party Finder for learning parties that stick together for more than a few pulls. I cannot recommend enough trying to play with people with similar interests in the content to yourself. Learning together can be fun so long as no one expects too much from a group that is trying to learn. If you feel like PF is more your speed, it's perfectly fine to learn and prog that way, but be prepared to be switching groups often with parties disbanding. If possible, try and stick around with the same people there as much as you can, as even the small synergy gained from those players can be useful. PF can also be more inviting with a friend or two to play, in which case I'd recommend even hosting the learning party so you can control when to reform when needed. Schedule wise, if you join a group, there are various terms you might see that describe group schedule for raiding, and usually they go as follows: casual or softcore, midcore, semi-hardcore, hardcore, and world prog. For learners, the last two may not be appealing, as they usually involve double-digit hours of prog every single day until finishing the raids. But casual and softcore, midcore and semi-hardcore to an extent, could appeal to those wanting to begin raiding. You can expect anywhere from 1 to 2 sessions a week of a few hours with casual or softcore prog, all the way up to 5 to 6 hours several days a week for semi-hardcore, and some go even further. People's descriptions vary on these numbers. If you need places to find a group, unfortunately your best shot are recruitment discords, and occasionally the Final Fantasy XIV Recruitment subreddit, again, links down below. European Raiding Central is used for any groups on the EU data centers, and Final Fantasy XIV Recruiter is used for North American groups, but it can feature some EU groups also. If using these, try and be clear in the looking for group channels about what you're wanting from the raids to help people see if you're on the same wavelength. And just remember, it's not a job interview, and don't feel it is as such if you're asked about joining a group. Once you're sure about what sort of group you want to do your raiding with, the next step is beginning to learn the raids themselves. These days, if you ever looked at a guide for any fighter in the last few years, the name that will probably come up is Hector, and his guides, while not necessarily optimal, work well for new and experienced players alike, and are great for their widespread use, meaning if you practice a fight in a group and want to head into PF or vice versa, you already know your position. Check links below for Hector's channel. This does not mean Hector guides are the only available strats, however. The current Savage tier, as of this video, Cruiserweight, has various raid plans that display step-by-step positions for each mechanic. If you're in a static group, make sure you all agree on which strategy to use. For Party Finder, 99% of the parties will list the strategies used in their description and provide a link after joining. For finding raid plans, there are a few useful resources. Firstly, the website Where the Flip Do I Go has tools for displaying your exact positions for each fight. Simply input your role and position and it will highlight where to go for each mechanic. Secondly, and a bit of a shameless plug here, I made this Google sheet earlier this year for finding various raid plans. Each tab has a different expansion and the most common ones are marked with such with notes. Lastly, mostly for ultimates which I'll go over later, the LPDU Discord and resources are the most commonly used strats, and the video guides on Tessan Twintail's channel are great too. Links for all of these below. One of the most important things to remember while progressing a fight is that you shouldn't expect to be getting necessarily further every single pull. The raids are designed to be hard, and you shouldn't be upset if you spend a whole session on a single mechanic. There are limits of course, but some mechanics work differently in people's brains. It's a good idea, once getting a feel for each mechanic, to know when to admit your wrongs. Messing up something is made better by knowing how it could be done right. The same goes to an extent for your group, but try not to flame anyone for messing up, and ask them if they were right at the mechanic. It is so vital that anyone in the group is happy to admit that they don't get a particular mechanic, and helping them feel comfortable in doing so is the step in the right direction. Being able to then explain it until they get more of a good idea can do wonders for morale and prog. If you're at the stage of almost finishing a mechanic and just want to try to see further, always remember that when you resurrect, you get the 5-second transcendence window of invincibility, so long as you don't perform any actions except moving. This can be used to tank damage from AoE effects or a stack marker to help your group without risking another death. Another important thing to utilise are waymarks. Placing down markers that indicate specific directions is obviously extremely useful, and even placing the basic ABCD on the cardinal directions can help find positions easily. There are a couple of settings I would recommend toggling on if you haven't already. Firstly, these mouse mode settings, enable these three and disable the bottom one. This prevents accidental targeting when using the mouse to move the camera, and stops accidental clicking off of your target if you use your mouse for abilities. Next, I recommend enabling this setting to see what percentage health the boss has left. It's just nice for seeing when mechanics happen and morale for seeing it get lower. The next setting is changing party colours to stand out a lot more in this menu. On this tab, I personally set my own colour to something that stands out from red, blue and green, so I have a light purple, and on the general tab, I set tank, healer and DPS party members to these colours. In combat it helps a lot, as you can clearly see which person is standing where at a glance, and distinguish yourself from a crowd if you need to move away. Lastly, in this menu, I recommend enabling the setting that displays the amount of time a debuff has remaining. This can really help timing mitigation or healing for debuffs that do damage when they expire. Although Ultimate's only entry requirement is to clear a particular Savage tier based on its release date, they are arguably the hardest content in the game, taking possibly hundreds of hours to clear. It should not be understated how daunting clearing an Ultimate can be, especially when the entire group is fresh. Even though similar principles apply when setting up for an Ultimate group, remember that prog will likely take a long time. My first Dragon Song's Reprise clear, for example, took me about 12 weeks and about 6 to 8 hours a week. The nice part is that Ultimates don't go anywhere like Savage tiers, so it's worth finishing if you have the time. If you want to get into Ultimates and you're not fussed about completing a particular one, I recommend starting with the Weapons Refrain Ultimate or the Epics of Alexander, UWU and T for short. These currently have the most lenient DPS checks, and UWU is unfortunately notorious for being able to skip a lot of mechanics these days. T has fast pace mechanics, some of which can apply randomly, which can help you get better at adjusting in general. Gear-wise for Ultimates, because of how gear scaling works, a lot of the older Ultimates are best done with current high eye level gear. The current level will usually require the correct eye level relevant to that Ultimate. For example, Futures Rewritten wants gear from the light heavyweight Savage tier. You can find these sets within the resources of the balance, so check below if interested. With how stressful this content can be when learning, it's easy to forget that it's just a game. Don't fret over mistakes you make, and try and help others instead of getting upset. It's okay to step away from the content if you feel it's not for you. You may occasionally run into players that take it very seriously, and if it turns out they want to invest much more time in the content than yourself, it's fine to be polite and say that you can't or don't want to commit to that. It's also fine if you decide that a particular fight in the set is too hard. For example, if the third or fourth fights of a Savage are too much, farm the first two instead until you feel confident. One key thing I mentioned earlier is the idea of synergy within the group. Playing long enough with a group to learn how each person generally plays is a great way to improve consistency, and it can help keeping it light and fun while raiding. It's a noticeable difference when everyone wants to come along to a raid instead of having it feel like a chore or obligation. Finally, and unfortunately something that needs mentioning, are particular websites that can help people gauge someone's skill at a job or progress for fights, FFLogs and tombstone.gg, as well as XIV Analysis. While these sites are all useful to show a person's DPS, how fast or how much they've progressed, or where someone is making mistakes in their rotation, please don't use them to bully or abuse other people. Just because your personal damage is higher or you perform better doesn't give you a reason to lord it over others. Yes, it's important people know how to play their jobs, but if they're doing well enough to clear without dying during the fight, then it's good enough, and consistency on a job will come with that. However, even though I just said that, if you want a way to show your level of skill in the higher end content, these metrics are the standard for doing so. Keep an eye on your numbers on FFLogs, the higher they are the better that fight went, and aiming for a 60 to 75 is a good measurement for knowing you're doing things well. Take that with a grain of salt however, as RNG for critical hits and damage variance, as well as how well your team performs can make a lot of difference to the result. XIV Analysis is a useful tool which shows you what you did wrong in your rotation for a particular fight, and I recommend using it if you want a bit more in-depth information. Well, that was some amount of minutes of me going over some stuff for getting into high-end content in this game. Honestly, most of what I said is just things I picked up since starting the game back in Stormblood, and it's carried me through to hardcore raiding and even making real friends within the groups. If you've got any tips I missed, leave a comment, and I hope this video helped your raiding experience even if only a little. Thanks for watching everyone.